For the past several years, I've seen financial publications call out the battle between advanced micro devices and NVIDIA, oftentimes suggesting that the smaller company could be a much better bet because it's cheaper. And, you don't even have to zoom out a few years. You can just look a few weeks ago, calling several different publications suggesting that AMD could be the NVIDIA of 2025, or AMD versus NVIDIA, which is the better semiconductor bet for 2025. And usually the conclusion is AMD smaller, cheaper, therefore it's more compelling. Yet, if you look at AMD over the last 3 years, it's underwater, lost about 13%. Yet NVIDIA over the same time period is up over 400%. So now is now the time for, AMD to shine? Well, let's look at the recent results. You see in the last 6 months, the stock continues to be under pressure. Today alone, it's down another 5%. Recently in the Consumer Electronics Show, there were some favorable developments talking about leveraging their products with AI. However, Wall Street analysts like HSBC continued to downgrade the stock, suggesting that it's just not as competitive against NVIDIA, particularly with their GPUs. HSBC is not alone. Goldman Sachs also earlier today announced that they were downgrading AMD. And the main reasons were, first of all, lowering their price target from 175 to 129. And this is largely due to the sort of very competitive market. Yes, they can win some market share against like Intel and the PC and server markets, and I'll be talking more about their wins in the PC market shortly. However, taking share from the king, NVIDIA, with their GPUs is just going to be very, very tough. And so that's why you've seen Wall Street sort of turn sour or less bullish on AMD. So, this whole conversation about cheaper or better, we'll talk about that dynamic in this video, because I think it is important to always consider the fundamentals. And so we're going to look at the fundamentals of AMD, their most recent results. Also, sort of a snapshot of the key segment that's really driving AMD and NVIDIA, which is the data center segment, which is the GPUs that are used to power the ongoing AI revolution. And everyone knows this AI revolution is potentially decades, in terms of the making, in terms of the opportunity. So, a huge infrastructure bet that might be coming, in the years ahead, and who's going to have the most cutting edge GPUs that's going to win. And, those GPUs are going to power these data centers. And so right now, NVIDIA is the king, and the question is, well, can AMD take market share, and what's going on with those individual segments? So we're going to go into the fundamentals of both AMD as well as NVIDIA, thoughts about the valuation, thoughts why you keep seeing these articles about, is AMD a better bet? My own personal thoughts on where does AMD go from here. If this is your first time tuning in, my name is Daniel. You're watching Unrivaled Investing. Let's look at AMD's most recent results, and you can see revenue up around 18% in the most recent quarter, gross margin expanding nicely, up 3% from 51 to 54%. And you can see their operating income also up 34%. These are all non-GAAP, so this is adjusted for, I believe, stock-based compensation. If you look at the GAAP results, it's much more favorable in terms of their growth and earnings. So overall, heading in the right direction. When you look underneath the hood, once again, as I already mentioned, it's the data center business that's really driving this company, where data center revenue's up over 122%. It's a $3.5 billion revenue figure in the most recent quarter for AMD. Remember that figure, that 3.5 billion. That's going to be important in just a second. Another, so I'd say the highlight is the data center segment. The negative has been their gaming segment, which more seasonal, more cyclical, just depends on where you are in the cycle, and that's down around 70%. So maybe that rebounds sometime in the future, but really it's a data center story, and the majority of their revenue now comes from this data center segment. If you look at, analyst expectations as well as AI, extrapolation and expectations of where revenue could go in the years ahead, it's looking at the current results, around, $20-25 billion in revenue, suggesting that in the years ahead, maybe it gets to 40 billion, maybe even closer to 60 billion, as they continue to scale and you see the demand for data centers continue to increase. They've also talked about their wins with the PC market, as I already mentioned, which, very recently, just a couple of days ago, they were talking about their first Dell commercial PCs being powered by the AMD AI Pro processors. And so this is a favorable development. One of their segments, not the data center segment, this is the PC segment. But the reality is, when you compare their data center, key driver, 3.5 billion in revenue that we just talked about growing at 120%, it's tiny compared to NVIDIA. And NVIDIA's data center segment, this is their data center revenue alone, was around $31 billion. So you're talking about 8-9 times bigger than AMD alone. And the reason why that's important is, that's suggesting that the marketplace is already sort of settled who has the best product. Because when you have NVIDIA that's multiples bigger and growing at multiples of your size, because 3.5 billion, they're growing 112% versus AMD 120%. Yes, AMD is growing slightly faster, but still they grew multiple AMD data center segments, on a year-over-year basis. So I think that's super important to reflect that there's a lot going on with NVIDIA that suggests that they're just continuing to win, and that any sort of market share gains, you're not really seeing the inflection that you would need to see to say, oh, you are rapidly going to take market share. You're rapidly going to disrupt, NVIDIA's dominance in the data center segment. At least that's not what the data is suggesting at this point. And I would say it's very likely that NVIDIA will maintain their stronghold in the data center, GPU market. Now, the key argument that investors keep going back to is, well, wait a second, AMD is a sub $200 billion company and NVIDIA is a multi-trillion-dollar company. So isn't this going to be a better bet? And, AMD is 8 times sales versus closer to 30 times sales for NVIDIA. Well, the truth is a lot comes down to the growth rates. NVIDIA is growing much, much faster on a consolidated basis versus AMD. And so it really does come down to growth rates and margins over time. So one might argue there's a good reason why NVIDIA has significantly outperformed AMD. It comes down to the fundamentals. It's not just, hey, can I get something cheaper? It's maybe the quality's better. It's like going into a restaurant and saying, getting the burger meat is, getting a cheeseburger. Yes, it's delicious. I'm a big fan of burgers myself. In-N-Out's, I think, my favorite go-to. But, if you see a steak and a filet mignon for, a sizable premium, it's not you're talking about very different quality. One's a burger, one's burger meat, and one's steak. One's, premium steak. So it is important to understand that dynamic. And I think when you're comparing AMD to NVIDIA saying, oh, this burger price is so cheap versus the filet mignon, it's important to recognize, one has the goods. Now, as we look at AMD's valuation, what are my thoughts about AMD in the years ahead, especially as it's underperformed over these last few years? First of all, as always, this is not financial advice. I don't own shares of AMD. And also a quick plug, just yesterday, Jordan, a premium member of the Unrivaled Investing community, shared the following. This is a direct quote. I took both of your courses and I feel like I'm so much better at investing because of you. So thank you. This follows Henrik, another premium member, saying this was also, I think, just in the last week or two. He said, subscribing to your platform is the best financial decision I've made in my life. He's talking about Unrivaled Investing. If you're looking for compelling ideas, come check it out. And so when we look at AMD, here's actually my framework that I used on AMD back when it was around $97 a share. This was in 2022, I believe, and you can check out my prior video on it. And I effectively said, not crazy compelling. Maybe it's, down a little bit over the next 5 years. Maybe it's up roughly 100% over the next 5 years. But I wasn't really sold on it. It didn't jump out. And I would say this framework largely still holds. As I look at, what are some of the possibilities, AI generated possibilities of, how it performs in the years ahead, maybe that you get to that $40 to $60 billion in revenue over the next 5 years. Maybe your margins continue to improve. Last 2 years, it was closer to single digits. Maybe it gets to, 20 to 30% over the next few years, net cash balance sheet. So, you're going to have favorable interest income, but still it's hard to say, oh, this company should definitively be worth, let's say 20, 30 times plus. I think a 15 to 25 times range probably makes sense given the uncertainty and the competitive dynamics in this, in this business, and the cutthroat dynamics you're running in place oftentimes just to sort of compete with new and cutting edge products. And so using that framework of continued growth, continued profit margin expansion, and let's say around a 20 times earnings multiple 5 years from now, then you're sort of saying, yeah, there's maybe, 100% upside over the next 5 years, and maybe there's 50% downside over the next 5 years. It's just not crazy compelling. And so even though AMD stock has been really underperforming the last few years, I would say it's still not in a territory where I go, wow, this is deeply compelling. I think there are ideas out there, but you need to find, the fillet and buy it at the In-N-Out, cheeseburger prices. That's when you're getting this great setup. You can also, you can also do well buying burgers at burger prices if you're like, you know what? I know what I'm getting into, or buying filet at filet prices. The goal, however, is to get the premium goods at a discount. Now, you can occasionally find something where you can pencil out, hey, I think this has 200 to 400% upside. And earlier today, I did call out, an idea that I was just buying, to my subscribers at Unrivaled Investing. But as I look at this framework for AMD, it's just hard for me to get the confidence to say, yes, this definitively should be hundreds of percent higher. Once again, as you think about this framework, you would have to say with confidence, yes, you're going to grow at a faster than 21% clip, through 2028, and you're going to get to better than 29% profit margins, and you're going to get to a more than 25 times multiple. So you'd have to assume better than all of that just to get to that 70 to 100% upside. And it's not crazy compelling. I think there are just easier plays out there where it sort of knocks you over the head and you go, well, yeah, of course this has, significant upside potential. Anyway, I hope this video talking about AMD, the historic articles about AMD versus NVIDIA, I hope it's been helpful for you. If so, please make a point of hitting that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for tuning into Unrivaled Investing.